Check.
Check.
All right, so we good. Loyal, first and foremost, giving all glory, honor, and praise to Yahweh, by Hashem, Yahweh Shai, by Hashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well over the flock of Israel. And shalom to all you brothers out here that's pushing the words of truth and sincerity. Shalom. I thought to go live today just concerning some of my favorite topics dealing with the resources we have, secular and biblical literature and archaeology, everything concerning the captivities we went through, mainly emphasizing on Hellenistic period. The title of the video here is, I believe it's okay, a few things we must get used to as captive exiles. And that first thing is that the heathen nations, um, mainly Esau, Edom, are going to know more about our own history than we do. All right, so we have to get used to the heathens, all right, Esau, knowing more about our own history than we do. All right, concerning the um, different captivities that we went in. All right, concerning some of our older customs and practices because there was a falling away. Now, when you're going to the scriptures, real quick, and this is the book of Psalms 119 and 90. It's like it Psalms 119 and 97 to 104. I'm gonna read out of the new KJV. Oh, how I love your law. It is my meditation all the day. So one thing we have going for us is that when we return back to the Heavenly Father, that's what we're doing. We're returning. So we already have this knowledge embedded in us. This is the practices and the customs in which we used to follow. Scripture says, seek ye the old paths for a reason. So it's not like we're just inventing some new idea. This is nothing new, all right, of a custom, of a heritage. We're not creating some new way to live and a new, broader idealism of how the world should be. No, on the contrary, this is everything going back to what our forefathers had, what we once had. So it's a convert, it's a returning back to the old ways, right? Scripture says, ask of your fathers, ask ye of your fathers. Why would you ask to the fathers? What do the fathers have? They have the information on the past. They have everything that we used to know. Um, ask ye of your fathers. I'm trying to find some of these scriptures as I think about them off the top. Ask ye of your fathers. That's in maybe Deuteronomy. All right. So Deuteronomy 32 and 7 says, remember days, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy fathers thee and thy elders, and they will tell thee. So a lot of what we're doing revolves down. Now, when you come into once again a few things we must get used to as captive exiles, right? We captive exiles. One, we're in captivity. We're the Israelites. We're the people who were brought over here on slave ships, and our people was conquered by another nation. The Lord said, I'll send another nation as swift as an eagle, right? And so we know we're in a captive state and we're exiles because it's not our homeland. Our homeland is Jerusalem, Israel, in which we'll return to one day. And so we must get used to as captive exiles the fact that other nations know more about our own history than we do. So I stumbled upon this video on YouTube called "To Be Greek or Not to Be Greek: Ancient Judaism Confronts Hellenism," and it's uh, um, Amalek, this Amalekite is going through some of our history, and it's a lot of it is on point. He's bringing back some of the sources that we have to understand what Greek Hellenistic period in that age did to Jews, mainly in Jerusalem and the diaspora. What it did, them believing that they are the true people, us we understanding that and believing that we are the true people. Either way, the heritage and the history remains the same. These are the same sources that we use, the books of Maccabees and other apocrypha, books of Daniel, Josephus, Greek and Roman documents, and archaeology. Some of our history as told by Amalek.
Exile, the book of Daniel was written during this period and has a lot of apocalyptic elements to it, and this sort of this clash of ancient civilizations that are referenced in the book of Daniel are viewed by many biblical scholars as reflecting the tension between the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, and the Greeks. We have the works of the Roman Jewish scholar Josephus. He lived much later, but we find within his narrative story the long history of the Jews that he tells really detailed elements of this period. So presumably he had access to some of these older texts that we're talking about, and access to some of the contemporaneous Greek Roman documents that again might not be referencing so much the conflict, but talk about some of the figures. So there's some it gives corroboration at least to the individuals that are referenced in these books of the Maccabees, because we find them in other documents. And then there's the archaeological record. Specifically, we have coinage from ancient Palestine from this era that references not only the Seleucid Greek kings, but subsequently the Hasmonean kings. Right? So there are coins that are minted in the land of Israel and stamped with the names of Hasmonean kings, of Jewish kings of Israel. So if you're into that sort of stuff, you can go online, you can see the imagery. If you go to Israel, you go to the Israel Museum, you'll see examples of not only of the coinage, but also of contemporaneous inscriptions. And now in Jerusalem, with some degree of accuracy, I'm not an archaeologist, so I'll just believe what they say, but you shouldn't believe everything they say, that in what's technically the City of David area, if you're familiar with the digs around Jerusalem, so that's south of the Western Wall, they've uncovered a fortress called the Akra, which is mentioned directly in these ancient texts. And is actually relevant to the conflict with the Greeks. So there's some archaeological support. So my whole point of saying all this is don't just believe me. That I've at least done some research in this area, though I don't read Greek in the original either. Some important background that I want us to consider. Where does this story unfold? And when does this story unfold? The where is clear enough that we're talking about our area in the land of Israel here, which, as was often the case, still is often the case, at the crossroads of things. And that's why I throw this map out here. I'll talk about it in a minute. But even before we get to the rise of the Greeks and the conquest of Alexander the Great, it's important to know that from perspective, we're talking hundreds of years after not only the destruction of the temple, but after the return of some Jews from Babylon to the land of Israel under Persian auspices. Babylonians destroyed the temple, took the Jews into exile. The Persians defeated the Babylonians, and King Cyrus the Great said, you can go back. Some did not, but enough did to create a new Jewish temple, the Second Temple, and resurrect, to some extent, Jewish life in the land of Israel. But
Now he's referring to Cyrus the Great, who was the first Persian king at the time of the takedown of the Median Empire, and that's referred to in the book of Isaiah 41. All right, so when you go to Isaiah 41 and 25, it says, I have raised up one from the north, and he shall come, in the rising of the sun shall he call upon my name. And from the rising of the sun shall he call upon my name. That one from the north is Cyrus the Great. And he shall come upon princes and upon mortar, and as the potter tradeth clay, who have declared from the beginning that we may know, and before time that we may say he is righteous. Yea, there is none that showeth, and yea, there is none that declareth, yea, there is none that heareth your words. The first shall say to Zion, behold them, and I will give to Jerusalem one that bringeth good tidings. For I beheld, and there was no man even among them who was no counselor that I asked of them uh, could answer a word. I'm in the middle of something. What's up? All right. So verse 26 says, that confirmeth the word of his servant and performeth the counsel of his messengers, that saith to Jerusalem, thou shalt be inhabited, and to the cities of Judah ye shall be built, and I will raise up the decayed places thereof. Thus saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up the rivers. Verse 28, thus saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd. So the Lord designated that Cyrus will be the Lord's his own shepherd. All right, and the shepherd leads sheep, right? So he led us back into the nation, into the kingdom of Israel. We were restored underneath the Persians by way of Cyrus the Great. It says, and shall perform all my measures. So what he allowed to Israel to do is go back, portion of us, not all of us went, but he allowed a portion of us to go back to Israel and build, all right, and build a city, okay. Um, yeah, because there's particular evidence that certain Jews remained in Persia after the time of Cyrus, which is where you get um, Esther, the book of Esther 2:1. And after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was pleased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. And you go all the way down. It talks about how he got rid of Vashti. Um, it brings in the Mordecai, verse 5. It says, now in Shushan, the palace was, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. So, what are the Jews doing in the palaces or in the land of Persia after we were sent back or allowed to build? What were Jews doing back in Persia? Because some stayed, some remained in Persia. Simple and plain. That's where you have the story of Mordecai, Esther, right? In verse 7, and he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. For she had neither father nor mother, and was a maid and fair and beautiful, when Mordecai and her father and her mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So the history of us remaining in Persia is still evident. But let's continue.
But not until talking about here at the end of this Hasmonean tale was there true sovereignty. Yes, you had a question. Sure. So Babylonia is Iraq. So you'd be talking about right here between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Okay. Um, so that's one important piece of history, is that already the Jews are scattered a little bit, and already the Jews had to had to accommodate, not only to living in exile, but living under someone else's authority. Right.
And that's another thing that this title is about. This video is about a few things that you have to get used to as captive exiles. You have to get used to other nations being authorized and having authority over you, right? Doesn't Romans the 13th chapter kind of go into that pretty cover that pretty well? You go into Romans 13. Let's grab it. 13 real quick. I'm just going to read in the NLT just for some edification. Romans 13:1. Everyone must submit to government authorities, for all authority comes from Yahweh, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by Yahweh. Daniel's 4:17 proves that. So anyone who rebels against authorities, rebelling against what Yahweh has instituted, and they will be punished. For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear of the authorities? Do what is right, and they will honor you. So one of the things you have to get used to as a captive exile is having people of other nations in authority over you. And that's why you have brothers doing videos on some of these more science temple guys that like to call themselves sojourners or sovereigns, and then they're not driving, they're traveling, and they bring out these documents that they're not to be governed by law enforcement, and they don't have a social security number, they don't have a pass, but they ultimately, the end goal is to have the authorities back off of you just because you're your own sovereign. But that never works. It always ends up with the 90% of them getting locked up and getting warrants and so forth and so on. So our understanding is, which is a difficult one, I understand, but being that we are captive exiles, you must learn to go according to what authorities says. What the authority of the land? What is the Bible? What did the Lord say? He said, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar." He was talking about the Romans tax code. All right, Romans. One of them was a tax collector. I believe it was Mark or Luke. Um, was a tax collector. And so Romans collected taxes, just like every other nation that rules over you. You have to pay tributary. As your own people, you can be as you serve whatever God you want here in America, you must pay your taxes, correct? So there's no way of getting out of that. And the Lord didn't try to wiggle his way out of that. He didn't try to find loopholes in the law for him to do. He just went ahead. He told Peter or Paul, or I forget, Peter, I believe, to go and go and fish and pull out the first fish you cast and pull out of the water, which I have two denarii or two coins in its mouth, and that's what you pay to Caesar. And so he also said, you know, when thou art in the way of thine adversary, agree with him quickly. So these are some of the things that you have to learn as a captive exile. And if Israel just stopped trying to fight against the law and instead tried to remember who we are as a people, you wouldn't have half the incarceration rate you would have as you had today. You wouldn't have half of the murder rate. Everything would be down substantially. But you never had a politician, you never had a leader, you never had a mayor that tried to influence the people of Israel to turn back to their power by ways of adherence to some of the laws, statutes, and commandments that we used to have, and just overall believing in the higher power, even in the times of captivity, and then researching what our previous captivities were like. That might give you some type of understanding, wouldn't it? Don't you want to know how we dealt with Persia and these different various kingdoms? Don't you want to know how we dealt with Antiochus Epiphanes, who was an evil ruler? All right, and mentioned in Daniel's and mentioned in Apocrypha. Don't you want to know how we dealt with, uh, uh, you know, Ahasuerus and all of these different kings? Well, it's written in the scriptures how our people have dealt with these leaders before who ruled over us, heathen nations. It's nothing new under the sun. Let's continue.
right? And part of that meant accommodating culturally. And part of that meant accommodating politically. So some of the things that we'll talk about in terms of giving tax, paying tax to the emperor, or even accommodating to the emperor cult that you might have in some places, which might sound really heretical, were sort of normative. I mean, this was like, part of the environment. If you lived in this ancient world, this was expected that yes, you could have your local practice and you could worship your own way, but you were supposed to recognize that someone else was in charge. And as far as we know, there's really very little documentation we have on this interim period between the return of the Jews to the land of Israel and this Hasmonean era that we'll talk about, the rise of the Maccabees. You have a few hundred years where very little is known. There's very little documentation. But we can, I think, presume that the Jews figured out how to live, how to accommodate to this environment, and that the people that were in charge let the Jewish way, let Jewish customs continue, allow Jewish modes of worship to continue, because we know that it didn't die out. Okay, onto the scene comes Alexander the Great. And there's a lot you could talk about with respect to Alexander the Great, but one of the things that's important for us.
Another point is if Peter spoke about honoring authority. The title is called "Respect People in Authority." First Peter's 2:1 for the Lord's in the NLT for respect all human authority, whether the king as head of state or the official. For the king has sent them to punish those who do wrong and to honor those who do right. All right, so there it is. One of the steps of understanding and returning back to the Lord, is understanding there's a few things we must get used to as captive exiles. You're a captive. That's number one. What does it feel like to be a captive? It feels like when another man who is not a part of your culture, heritage, has influence and authority over you. And that's very hard for a lot of our people. But as hard as it is, you will see yourself either dead or in jail if you do not somehow, some way respect and agree with thine adversary in some form, in some fashion. We all have to do it. All right. There's no renegade Israelite who, when them blue and red lights flicker behind your vehicle while you're doing, you all of a sudden, you know, say, I don't got to listen to nobody. May the Lord be with me, and start calling upon the name, and you hit the gas. Bzzz. You don't have to. Don't OJ your life into penitentiary, man. We almost out of here. Just resume what you've been taught. Harmless as a dove, wise as a serpent.
Us is he's at least given credit for. This is some more popular history in terms of telling the story of bringing along with him the Greek way of doing things. That not only did Alexander armies march all the way out here and ultimately conquer most of the colored territory here. But at the same time, he brought his scholars, his scientists, his artists, his poets, and built Greek cities everywhere that he went, and created, again, this notion of a broad multinational or supranational Greek way of doing things, which also meant not only was the Greek way influencing local traditions, but also that those Greek traditions, as they spread far and wide, were then influenced by local traditions in other places. And that's something I think that's really important to recognize in terms of one of the stark differences between the Jewish way as we know it today certainly as the Maccabees understood it, and a broader Hellenistic tradition, is that Hellenism was not only polytheistic in terms of that Greek understanding of many gods, but it was relatively tolerant in terms of alternative modes of worship. When Alexander brought his armies in and they went all the way out to Persia, they didn't demand that the Persians throw out their religious traditions. Now, there was some overlap, perhaps, and they said, okay, you had these Persian names, you'll just assign those Persian names to our Greek gods, we'll overlay our polytheistic system onto yours. There's evidence of some of that, but at the same time, they really allowed people to continue worshiping as long as it didn't conflict with the Greek way of doing things, and didn't create a problem for them. And this was true for the Jews as well. And generally speaking, that was true for the Jews under Persian rule as well. So the Jews had become accustomed, this is very important for when things go south, the Jews had become accustomed to living as a monotheistic culture within a broader polytheistic society that was religiously tolerant, right? And part of one of the challenges there, interestingly enough, and this might sound counterintuitive because we're so enlightened today, is that the Jewish tradition was actually not all that tolerant, because it was a monotheistic tradition, and the monotheism, raw monotheism is generally much less tolerant than raw polytheism, just on the nature of what it is. You believe in one and only one God who's responsible for everything. It's a very different outlook on the world than this notion that there not only are many gods, but you have your gods, and you have your gods, and you have your gods, which is, generally speaking, how things operated in this Hellenized Mediterranean. Fast forward, not even that far, Alexander does not live very long. After his death, his kingdom is split primarily into three chunks, though farther in this.
Yeah, and so he's speaking about the dilemma in which a lot of Israelites had being in captivity of the other nations. One of the many dilemmas is that at one point in time um, we would be obviously the way the Lord set up Israel is that we're not to be tolerant of them. So they're allowed to be tolerant of us. What I mean by that, look at American culture. They can be tolerant of any religion you choose, pretty much. You're allowed to believe in any God you want. But amongst Israel, the true believers, you're not too allowed to believe. That's idolatry. That's committing adultery, fornicating against the Heavenly Father. He's a jealous power. We know that. We're doing that for our safety, not believing in multiple gods and allowing our children to do that. We're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to allow our children to become freaks, and we're not even supposed to allow our children to, really practice and rehearse things that the nation or the country does, like certain certain holidays of Halloween and things. So we're pretty much existing in a space that is detrimental to our salvation, and so we have to be like contraries in our own country. Yeah, they had made us citizens. Paul spoke about being a Roman citizen, but he didn't behave as the Romans did. He only did that to win over some to Yahushua. He didn't. He said, "To the Jew, I became a Jew. To the Greek, I became a Greek." That does not mean he started throwing on togas and sacrificing to Baal Barith or on Mars Hill to whatever that goddess name is. It doesn't matter. He didn't become a heathen. He just spoke like them. He would use their cultural references. Use certain things that they understand in cultural references. So to bring them and to win them over to Yahushua, right? It's like he's preaching to them a new understanding of that old religion that they left when they came to the Greek cultures. But he's teaching them what they missed in the development, that one like unto the Son of Man has come. And remember that the prophets always spoke about a return and a restoration of our people through a Messiah, and he has come, he has risen, right? And so that's how he came to Israelite foreigners who had taken on that. But what happens with Israel is that you begin to try to be like that. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, and you completely have put off. A lot of us just didn't know who we were. You just consider yourself American or black. That's a part of just being, dumb, deaf, and blind. You don't even consider who you were before you came to America. You just see a thriving country. You just see a place where there's some type of opportunity, even for a so-called black man or Native American man. You see some type of opportunity, and you're willing to go all in for it. You know what I'm saying? Tuck your tail between your legs. To hell with your past and what happened to your people, and just tuck your tail in and go forward. You're not trying to seek the old past. You're not even trying to seek your culture. So that would be somebody example of a captive exile who's pretty much dumb, deaf, and blind. You're dumb dogs. You're dry bones. You haven't returned back to the Lord. You're not wiser than your enemies, according to Psalms 119 and 97. You haven't considered the old past and the ways in which we used to have. But then you had Israelites in many of the captivities who just sought to be more like the heathen. You just saw the heathen. The Psalm 73. I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. You can see these people and start to try to become like them because yeah, really it's envy. And so you got to be very careful in this society about the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes, because you're going to see things that, man, like, you're going to try to chase youthful lust. The scripture talk about fleeing youthful lusts. And as you consider the envy, the foolish and the envy, the wicked prospering, you might want to start to reflect on, like, well, how can maybe I could prosper. Maybe prospering is for everybody, and my idea and my mind frame is bad, but you don't consider that you're not them, man. You're not them, and they have an end. When you go into Psalm 73 and you familiarize yourself with what ASAP is talking about, he says that when he finally understood the end of these people, that's when it made sense. That's when it clicks. He was envious because he didn't understand their end. It's all about the end. See, the end means reward. The Lord said, "I determined their bounds and set their bounds that they cannot pass." There's a point in which it ends for him. I mean, it ends bad, terribly for Esau, Edom. Right? The form of destruction is going to be one worse than you've ever seen before. That lake of fire. All right. So in Isaiah 30 and 1, let me get it in the KJV. Isaiah 30 and 1 talks about how at times our people can make alliances when we're in captivity. What other options really do you have between either being steadfast, right, serving the Lord, and not caring and considering who makes money and who's rich and who's prospering, even out of your people? You don't care what they do. You and your house shall serve the Lord, like Joshua said. Well, the other option was be to completely integrate. You know what I mean? Be just like them. You know what I mean? Like completely turn into a American Israelite. Isaiah 30 and 1 says, "Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me." So the Lord got these type of individuals in this in his scope. The ones that semi return back to the Lord, the ones that really truly want that alliance with the heathen nations to continue. They feel some type of power and privilege over you Israelites who haven't really impacted, like made an alliance with the heathen. So they look at you, they look down on you. You know, I'm speaking of some of the guys like that are Masons. You know, think about all your average Mason. He looks down on you, average so-called black men who haven't alliance, made some type of allegiance with the world powers. They look down on you. You know, you're still talking about a God that's going to come back and return, send a, and deliver us. But meanwhile, we're making alliances. The Lord said, "Woe to you," meaning destruction is coming for you. Saith the Lord that take counsel, but not of me. You took in counsel, but your counsel comes from the heathen. You know where their counsel comes from? Satan. Oh, their God is Satan. They worship the devil, hands down, right? Famous quote by a so-called Jewish man: "The God of the Jews is Satan." And so, you look at who's really running the trade, the sex trafficking rings, child sex trafficking. It be them. You look at who's covered up, covering up conspiracy the most. It's be them. You look at certain wars and how they began. It be all conspired by a lot of them, their own people. And so when you start trusting in the wicked and don't believe that his wickedness is going to show and reveal eventually, you're like a snake charmer. Who will pity you? You dancing, you moving around these snakes. Who's going to pity you when the snake actually bites your ass? And that's what Esau Edom is getting ready to do. Bite back, bite the hands. All the people that are in alliance with him. That's why the Obadiah said, all that are in confederacy with thee, right? So basically, they shall disappoint thee. Isaiah 30 and 1, but not of me, and that cover with the covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. That walk to go down into Egypt. Why? Because Egypt was, don't you understand, between Egypt being in the location it's at, in comparison to Jerusalem, has always been a place, or always been a an established society with a king for dynasties and dynasties and dynasties. Their legacy is goes all the way back to the Exodus, our first captivity. They've always been a powerhouse in the Middle East, Egypt. And then it's been Babylon. Even the three bears, Daniel used examples in Daniel's the seventh chapter of the bear that is lifted up on one side, symbolizing the Persians that they ended up taking over power over the Medo-Persian Empire. The Persians had more influence. So the bear was lifted up on one side, and the bear had three ribs in his mouth, three ribs in his teeth. The ribs stood for Babylon, one of the major hubs of the Mesopotamia. Then you had Lydia, right, which is basically that Asia Minor, a main serious influence in that area and region. And then you had Egypt. That was one of the ribs in his teeth, symbolizing the powerhouse that these three were. That the bear took down Persia. And so, as you going and reading into these scriptures about us walking down into Egypt, some of us going down to Egypt, that would be Israelites who wanted to perfect their life. They wanted to gain more access to good things. They were tired of waiting upon the Lord. They grew impatient. And the impatient ones of the nation of Israel will begin to make alliances with powerhouses outside of the nation of Israel, putting off their true covering, their true spirit, to go down and put on a different covering and a different spirit, be more like the Egyptians, be more like the Edomites, be more like the Moabites, Promise you, there are Israelites to this day, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who do believe that China will one day take over America or take over the world and be the number one superpower, and they are already in their minds beating the curve, ahead of the curve, preparing for a China dominated. So they are probably going over, making trips to China, trying to make alliances, and you know, this is what Israel do when they take off the covering of the Lord and put on a new spirit, a different spirit. But they'll be destroyed. It says that walk to go down into Egypt and have not asked at my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh. See, there's strength in Esau. He's in authority right now. Of course, there's strength. You see that woman that just made a video, and the brother shared it about how she said, you know, why would I serve the slave? You black men are slaves to the white man. He's the slave master. Why would I? That's the same understanding. The same understanding of Isaiah 30 is just happening all over again. Anytime you're in captivity as a nation, Israel, you're going to have those that grow impatient and can see the strength and the power of these other nations and how they remain. It looks as if they remain there, and then they want to make alliances with them. And at the expense of their own selves and their own families, they will put off their own culture to make alliances. Well, that's where our people are so involved with Esau to this day. Democrat Party, Eastern Star, Greek culture. All right. Anyway, let's continue. It says, and have not asked at my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, the Lord says. It says, in the trust in the shadow of Egypt, your confusion. So shame and confusion will cover the faces of our people. All right, so let's continue.
More conventionally Greek area it breaks down. And you have an Egyptian Greek culture, which is the Ptolemean Empire. You have the Assyrian Greek culture, which is the Seleucid Empire. And then this is really the Macedonian side of things stays in charge farther west in the northern Mediterranean.
And that's what Hellenistic world actually means. It means that Greek culture began to be adapted by all the powerhouses of the world because they became conquered. And Greek culture was more of a influential thing than we might ever understand. But you know who understands it is the heathen. They understand it. Greek culture, it says on Wikipedia, Hellenistic Judaism, and the word Hellenist is the original name for Greece. It says the Hellenic influence pervaded everything, and even in the very strongholds of Judaism, it modified the organization of the state, the laws, and the public. All right. Another article says the Hellenic influence pervaded everything. Okay, this is the same one. It modified the organization of the state, the laws, the public affairs, art, science, and industry, affecting even ordinary things of life and common associations of the people. I mean, Hellenistic Judaism changed everything about us, man. It made a serious impact. It says that a new article, Hellenism and Judaism, the cultural phenomenon that we call Hellenism had a lasting impact on Judaism and the Jews. Okay? So it was a lasting impact. The culture, the art, the thought, everything. It was a serious influence of the Greeks in the whole area, Mesopotamia, all the way down to Egypt, Alexandria, all the way to the what they call it, where the Persians ruled, Babylon, going all the way forward, even into Greece, even into Asia Minor, had this influence called Hellenism. And so, even if you were a traveled man at that time, you can travel south, north, east, or west, you were going to run into Greek speaking peoples of different nationalities embracing this one culture, this Greek culture. It says the cultural phenomenon that we call Hellenism I'm reading from an article. Had a lasting impact on Judaism and the Jews. Hellenism was a synthesis of Greek Hellenic culture with the native cultures of the Near East. It was a dynamic phenomenon with the ever evolving Hellenistic Greek like culture continually becoming the raw material for new synthesis with other native cultures not yet underway. And that's what America has become now. You know, you go to east, west, north, and south, you'll see different Israelites, but they're all practicing either black culture, which is a different identity of America. It's a false pseudo identity that America has as it's a synthesis of America. Black culture can't exist outside of America because people would kill you if you walk around talking about murdering them all day. In other parts of the world, but because American influence is so dominant, now you have hip hop permeating through, right? Now you have black culture permeating through the world through the influence of America. Because once America stopped, if America stopped, black culture stops. A lot of things stop. Democracy stops if America stopped. Um, um, this whole sexual liberation of women stops if America stops. So America has become like ancient Greece has and ancient Rome has. Let's continue.
The Seleucid emperor, call him a king, you can call him an emperor. Two emperors before our the bad guy in our for Antiochus Epiphanes is Antiochus III, Antiochus in Hebrew, also known as Antiochus the Great. And he actually gave a public proclamation, which survives, reaffirming, not actually granting, but reaffirming the Jewish right to practice as they would like. Right, to maintain their religious rituals, their traditions, which also meant, and this is one of the things that's interesting about it, that in the Israelite temple, in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, they were permitted to only sacrifice to their God, which was not normative. Right? If you went to other temples throughout the Greek world, you could worship lots, and were expected to worship lots of different gods. In the Jewish temple, they were allowed to maintain their tradition of worshiping only their one and only God. And which is why when ultimately you have a decision made by Antiochus IV to restrict Jewish practice, it is so extraordinary, right? Because prior to that point in time, even though, yes, you can find some evidence if you go through ancient of anti-Jewish sentiment, what we might call today anti-Semitism. The reality is, as I said, the ancient world was relatively speaking religiously tolerant. So when someone comes on the scene and says, we forbid you from engaging in your mode of worship, that was a little bit extraordinary.
So he's mentioning how all of the Antiochus line before Epiphanes allowed Jews to worship their God, our God Yahweh, without interfering, without any other gods being worshipped there. They allowed for us to be monotheistic under their authority and their rule. So this is another nation, the Greeks, ruling over Israel, but allowing the Jews, the people of that land, to practice the way we want to worship. Now, here comes Antiochus Epiphanes, which proves to you this scripture here, Sirach 2:12 and 10. Never trust thine enemy, for as iron rusteth, so is his wickedness. And what we know about iron? It's you take iron is a certain color, right? It's like a silver like color, I believe. And if you just stare at it for the first 10 seconds after somebody produces you some iron, it's silver, it's not going to change right away. You have to give it time. And you days, months, years. But more importantly, no matter what, how long it takes, eventually there will be rust all over that iron. It will not be the same color. It'll be weakened. It's called corrosion, air corrosion. Okay, and it's a natural process of what happens when iron oxidizes. I think it's called when air hits the iron. the natural process over time is it rusts. This is Esau Edom. For so many decades before Antiochus Epiphanes, we was allowed to worship monotheistically Yahweh in our temples as we wished. So there was no real reason or threat against the Greek Hellenism at that point in time, because they was kind of just allowing us to do us. But here comes Epiphanes, changes it all. Well, here we are in this day and age, right? Hebrew Israelites, we're allowed to go on the street corners, teach. We out there prophesying today. Days like Saturday. We out there yesterday. Brothers is out there tomorrow. Out there tomorrow. Abaradazah. We allowed to do certain things, right? Keep certain feasts, whatnot. There's all it takes is one epiphanies like man to come in and say, all right, game over. No more street teaching, right? Amos 8 and 11. Famine to hearing the word. No more YouTube. You won't be able to utilize YouTube. And furthermore, unless you get this mark, you're not going to be buying and selling. So the horns eventually will show and the iron eventually will rust. It says, though he humble himself and go crouching, yet take good heed and beware of him, and thou shalt be unto him like as if thou hast wiped a looking glass. And thou shalt know that his rust hath not been altogether wiped away, because the looking glasses was steel or metal, and eventually what will happen, iron, metal, it's all going to rust. If you don't clean it day to day, whatnot, it's just going to rust eventually. So there it is.
And also, one of the things that you see here is the fact that the locals took up arms in sort of a guerrilla warfare model, which we will talk about, was really exceptional. That sort of thing did not happen in the ancient world, where you had these clashes of imperial magnitude. And in fact, one of the reasons why you have the reaffirmation of privileges by Antiochus, the arguments as to why you have the persecutions under Antiochus IV was actually as an outcome of some of this broader geopolitical conflict, right? Because you're at the crossroads here between the Ptolemaic Empire, Seleucid Empire, both of which are culturally speaking Greek, but both of which also want to be in control. So they're constantly at war with one another. When the local Jewish community is viewed as being helpful, well, then the rulers want to, bestow benefits upon them. When they're viewed as being difficult, then the rulers may choose to punish them as they see fit.
And what's going to happen? There will be a great persecution upon the children upon the Israel, the believers that fear the Lord, according to Second Ezra's 16. And why is because the allegiances that are in play today, being that we're all pretty much U.S. citizens, if you're here in the United States, right? That being part of the allegiance, right? Where you can utilize, you still have to pay taxes, but you go all about, you got certain rights and privileges as a citizens to drive and what's so brothers is completely embedded in what and live inside this society, this civilization, America, right? But the direction in which America is going is gonna what's causing the time of Jacob's trouble. We can no longer be affiliated. At some point in time, we will no longer be able to be affiliated in the capacity in which we were, because the true believers of the Lord will not do what they demand us to do. We will be more problematic for their project what they want the future out of America to be. We don't align with. And so they've labeled us domestic. We will be labeled domestic terrorism through certain acts like the NDAA Act. Look it up, Patriot Act, what have you. We will be labeled as hate groups as we are now, SPLC and the FBI. We'll be labeled because we don't. It's not that we're doing some harm to U.S., but we're not aligned with their projected outlook on how they want this world to become. What they want is a new world government. What they want is this global reset. What they want is everybody marked up, C-hipped up, RFID'd up in this new Internet of Things, global connective uh, the technology age and we in, they want everybody in connected servitude with a one world government, one world cash system that's on the back of your dollar bill. These are their plans that they held for all these years. They're finally now starting to come to motion with it. They've been under the radar for so long, right? Just sneaking about, being subtle as a beast, the most subtle beast of the field, being a serpent. But now they're starting to become more open and real and honest with what they want, the projected way of the future under a one world currency. And the true believers is not going to be with it. We just not bending over, so they're gonna have to go into that Antiochus Epiphanes mode. Shut it down. Shut them down. Shut them down. Shut them down. Anybody remember that song from Onyx? They're gonna say shut it down. That goes shut down the street teaching, shut down the GMS pages, shut it down. Incarcerate. The scriptures tell you in Revelations 3 and 10. What does it say? Many of you shall be tried and thrown into prison for 7 days. All right, prison. Paul was thrown into prison. Peter was put into prison. What makes you think at any point in time when you're truly teaching about the coming of the day of the Lord, in which is the Lord is pretty much an avenger of us, an avenger of those that are martyred for His name. The Lord is an avenger of the blood that was those that will be beheaded for not worshiping the beast in this system that we coming into. So if we're promoting the Lord's return, we're actually promoting the downfall of this current society that we're living in. We're taking part of. We're also somewhat of an alliance with them because we citizens. All right, but that alliance will end when the RFID C hit comes out. That's when the alliance with as American citizen will pretty much be ended. No more habeas corpus. The Lord said, "Some of you shall be come before governors and magistrates and courts and judges, and then I will give you what to say." Right? Just like Yahushua was brought before them, just like Paul brought before Flavius and Festus. Okay, so these we understand what it's all coming down to because we understand from history what our people had to go through.
So here I'll give you an excerpt from the book of Maccabees, from First Maccabees, and this is actually prior to the Maccabean uprising and prior to, in the narrative in this book, prior to the persecutions of the Jews. And so this issue of assimilation, Hellenization, however you want to view it, was already out there before there was military conflict, before there was an uprising, before there was a civil war of any sorts.
They started to attack our customs. They started to attack our order. They started to attack what made us Israel, not just a nation, but a custom, a people, a heritage belonging to a nation. That's what made us Israel, right? And he brings out First Maccabees 1:11-15. Lawless men arose in Israel and seduced many with their. You just read it. Some go down to Egypt for trusting Egypt, trusting chariots. Lawless men arose in Israel, so this, part of our own people, and seduced many with their plea. Come, let us make a covenant with the Gentiles around us. Why? Because they are the ones who lack faith of our nation. Not all of our nation is returning back to the Lord and has the patience to an endurance to go through the trials, tribulations. Remember, some fell by the wayside. Remember, some fell by the thorny. Majority of those seeds didn't fall on good ground. Majority of the seeds were choked up. Majority of the seeds didn't become fruitful. Majority of the seeds died. And so in this end time, Zechariah 13:8, two parts shall be cut off and die. Majority of the seeds here in America is going to die. The majority of Israelites are going to die. These are the ones who gave up. These are the ones who were shaken out. These are the ones who couldn't grow. These are the ones who didn't take enough oil. They're foolish virgins. These are the ones who couldn't wait on the Lord no more. They're too tired to wait on the Lord. These are the ones that rather make a covenant, says, with the Gentiles around us, because ever since we have kept ourselves separated from them, we have suffered many evils. That is the idea of a lot of our family members. That's the idea of a lot of people that fall out the truth. That's the idea of those that don't ever want to be a part of this or affiliated with Israel, and now that are of the lineage of Israel. That is the idea of 2/3 of our people. They believe that they're suffering evils because they're not joined with the heathen. Not because we offended the Lord, not because we historically made a covenant from our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that we will be his people and he will be our power. And if we offend him, these certain curses, according to Deuteronomy 20 and 15 on down, is going to come to pass. They don't believe that the evils is cleave unto us and the curses are cleaving unto us. So we're made subject under these nations because the Most High decreed that if we offend them, these things will happen. They don't believe that's the reason we suffering evils. They believe it's because we're not applying ourselves to being cool with the heathen enough. You see, their conscience is seared with the hind iron. They don't know up from down, left from right. They're really blind as hell. The blind lead them blind. They don't have the conscience. They don't have the understanding. They don't even understand salvation. And they'll call themselves Christian with the quickness. You know why? Because Massa accepts that. It's one thing a Massa accept is you calling yourself a Christian, but not an Israelite. Let's continue. Thereupon, they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the customs of the Gentiles and underwent operations to disguise their circumcision, meaning they surgically put the foreskin back on the penis. You know why that became a practice to surgically put the foreskin back on the penis is because in the gymnasium you would wrestle naked. So you had all of these men coming out to wrestle and then they had circumcised penises, and the heathen nations would look at them, or Israelites would look at them and say, "Ah, disgusting." He has the the Jewish circumcised penis. You know what I mean? And so they began to. That's how sick. That's how sick it begot. To be like another nation. Scripture said, "While trims thy way, seeking love." All right. Are you is Israel a homeborn slave? It says rebelling against the sacred covenant. They joined themselves to the Gentiles and became willing slaves to evil doing.
And the text reads that lawless men arose in Israel and seduced many with their plea, "Come, let us make a covenant with the Gentiles around us, because ever since we have kept ourselves separated from them, we have suffered many evils." Right? So we kept ourselves separate. It's not that they were forcing anything upon us, at least this is from the author of the text, putting in the mouths of the people that he's actually critical of, that it was our decision to make a covenant with the Gentiles. Therefore, they, meaning the Hellenizing Jews, built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the customs of the Gentiles, and underwent operations to disguise their circumcision, rebelling against the sacred covenant. That was in order to participate in Olympics were done in Greek style in the nude. They joined themselves and became willing slaves to evil doing. So the reason that I put this out there for us to discuss is even before the Maccabees come on the scene, there's some conflict brewing. And the conflict is not necessarily with the authorities. The conflict is internal, right? They're arguing here as one group of Jews coming into conflict with another. Another way of viewing this ultimately is you have a different cultural outlook between the urban elites. Right? This stuff just doesn't, it's amazing. It doesn't go away, right? A cultural conflict between the urban elites who want to be part of that broader civilized world, part of that broader Greek world. And there's Greek presence in those urban areas, and people speak Greek, and there's commerce internationally. So there's a logic behind that, and that they're coming into conflict with a more traditional rural population, which is where the Maccabees come from. They are country priest folk, as it were, as compared to the city priest folk, and that's a fundamental element of understanding this conflict is internal. Right, not just internal between Hellenizers and non-Hellenizers, but there's an economic and class element to this as well.
And that's why you had so many different separations. By the time the Lord came on the scene, there were the Essenes, Sadducees, Pharisees, Zealots, right? Different factions, different beliefs upheld. and you had the people in the up, that desired the upper rooms, the one that brought in their phylacteries. You had regular common folk, you had harlots, you had poor, you had maimed, blind, sick. All right, you had some that were centurions and officials of the Roman Empire amongst Judea, and some that were plants. All right, certain high priests that was plants, and so you had a lot of that going on, and that's what always you have going on when the heathen nation is ruling over us, because it don't take much but to actually bow down and start to kowtow to the heathens in order to be important all of a sudden. And it's like, situation like with Jason. Jason ran to, I believe he ran to the Egyptian or ran to the Greeks to try to circumnavigate his way into power. And then there was a situation with Onias. I believe Onias, the priest, was slayed, right? Based upon him not giving up the goods that was inside. Jason, I think he was the one that promised the goods that was in the temple. And there was all type of backstabbing and treachery going on. That's why many evils started becoming a natural thing, occurrence inside of Jerusalem, because that became a hub. Jerusalem was always a hub. It's the space between the Seleucid Empire and the powerhouse of the Seleucids and the powerhouse that was the Ptolemaic, two powerhouses, and Israel was just caught in between. So geographically, it was a very important place to have dominance in too. So there was a lot going on, not just like he said, not just between Greeks and Jews, but also between Hellenistic Jews and more Orthodox, more traditional Jews. And then you had, Jews that was in Alexandria and what they thought. You're right. Jews that was in Asia Minor and what they, you know. Then you had the poor, then you had the rich. So you always have a continual thing of a lot of confusion and stuff going on back and forth, in fighting civil wars as and also cultural clashes. And this is just this type of information that you get when you start really researching what it was like during that time with the Lord and previous to him during the Maccabees Empire. But I digress. I'm gonna leave it here. I brought this out. This video was edifying. If you want to check out more, the title of the video is called, just go to YouTube and type in "To Be Greek or Not to Be Greek, Ancient Judaism Confronts Hellenism." All right, call lawyer Mihawa by Hashem Yahweh Shai, Wahara Kakwadash, that will understand my apostles and elders who rule well. Shalom to all you brothers out here that's pushing the words of truth and sincerity, and shalom to all that elect Hakim and Aqua. Shalom.